This is a video in our Vietnam series. This time it's about me. So what happened? When I was a teenager, I used to listen to the ballot for conscription, and at 16, when I was only 16, I went into the South Australian Police Academy. Back then you went in at 16 basically because they used you slave labour. You did all the manual work, all the dirty jobs, and you did them because they paid you a pittance at 16. So I went in at 16, and we were hearing things about the Vietnam War like you hear as a teenager with war stories and World War II. You don't think anything of it. You're unable to accept the death side of things, the horror side of things, the civilian issues. You just can't wrap your head around it at that age. So what happened in Australia, we had conscription. You could go into the Australian Army as a young teenager, and you could go off to Vietnam as a volunteer in the army. Well, not so much a volunteer in the army. You would join the army through your own free choice. Once you turned 18, then you could be sent to Vietnam to fight in the conflict. So the slight difference was that the conscription didn't apply until you were around 20 years of age. So what would happen is that every March and every September there would be a ballot. The balls spin around, much like Cross Lotto. You've got Cross Lotto, I think, in pretty much half the planet now. You pick out a ball, and the number on the ball was your birth date. And if that was your birth date, you got called up. How the ballot worked was there were balls in the ballot. Balls were picked, they correlated with a date. The March ballot was for birth dates from the 1st of January through to the 30th of June, and the September ballot was for the 1st of July through to the 31st of December. So I distinctly remember when I was 19, I sat down and listened to the ballot pick. It was summertime, it was the March ballot pick, wondering if I was a year older, would I have been called up? So I can remember that well, that I was in the police academy and a bunch of us sat around listening to the ballot pick for that year, even though I was not going to be eligible till the following year. So what I remember was that my date of birth wasn't called out, and so that year I would not, if I was a year older, I wouldn't have been called up for national service. So Australia, remember, at that time, we didn't start pulling out of Vietnam until 1970, and weren't fully out of Vietnam until July of 73. Slight pause there while a wild gust of wind comes through. So while the gust of wind comes through, should we do some Bruce Springsteen songs? Really, the headbands for Vietnam, so it should really be a Jimi Hendrix thing. What could we go with? Another video we've done, we've got to get out of this place. That wind driving us potty. Another Vietnam song. Anything come to mind? So you can't ad lib. So Australia started pulling out in 1970, and finally July of 73 is when the final troops that were in the embassy at Saigon finally left Vietnam. And so what happened is that, of course, the September ballot happened, and it still wasn't applicable to me, but the very next March ballot that took place was going to apply to me because my birthday is 4th of June, and so the next ballot in March would apply to the 1st of January to the 30th of June of that year, and that would be my year, and then we'd see would I get called up for national service. Now, how I felt about this at the time is I didn't care. I was in police recruiting. We were doing all the fitness stuff, the PT stuff, the gun stuff, as police recruits, the stuff we did was phenomenal. Canoeing, swimming, camping, mountain climbing, horse riding. We just did so much stuff, and it didn't bother me. It's how innocent and silly and naive you are. that I wasn't going to worry about it. You say, well, what could you do anyway, Steve? Well, in Australia, there were two things you could do. You could either go to university and be passing. You couldn't be a no-hoper at university. You had to be passing in uni. Or you could join the reserves, the Army Reserves, the Citizen Military, whatever you want to call it, Citizen Military Forces, CMF, the Army Reserve. You could join that, but you had to sign up for a minimum of 5 years. And then even when you were signed up, you wouldn't want to goof off. You had to go on parade for training 1 night a week of every 7-day period. 1 night a week of every 7-day period. You had to go for 1 full weekend every calendar month. And you had to go on a 2-week, minimum 2-week training camp every year. So you had to do that. You had to maintain those records. You wouldn't want to, if you were sick, get a doctor's certificate, but you really had to maintain that, or boom, they would have pulled you in. So I never bothered to join the Army Reserve because my thoughts were, if I get called up, I'll just go. That's because I'm innocent and naive and didn't realise what the true horror was. But anyway, what happened, the September ballot took place, and between the September ballot and the next March ballot, when I would be called up, the government changed. Gough Whitlam became our Prime Minister, and Gough said, that's it. No more conscription, and he stopped it. So I always say that thank you, Gough, because who knows what would have happened if conscription hadn't been ended. That's how close I could have come to going to Vietnam. It never happened, thank God, in hindsight. My respect to all who served. I know a few vets that are left now, and I've known a few who took their own lives. Several came back and of course were quickly accepted when they applied. They joined the police force, and several of those committed suicide. It's a terrible thing. So if you watch my videos and you ever get depressed about anything besides my videos, make sure you do something about it. You can always contact me, worst case scenario. Enough said. Subscribe. Stay tuned for more Vietnam videos, because there's going to be quite a few of them. There are a lot of rabbit holes. Isn't that right? Hey? Born to die. What were some of those other mottos? Born to kill. Anything you ever saw on Apocalypse Now or Full Metal Jacket. All based on that book I talked about before. Sidetracked again. See you next time. Cheers.